I did not anticipate you being George Michael fans. That's great news.
Oh, big George. I have a. You know what? I'll be right back. Hi, I'm Jess. Today we're opening up on Ceremony for enthusiasts, iconoclasts, anarchists, and you.
Oh, I'm so excited. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So you are in for a treat, and I'm going to tell you straight away what you're in for a treat, why you're in for a treat, and that is because you are animal lovers in my constellation, and you have got two serious animal lovers with us today. So hot on the heels of Professor Howard Williams talking about the animal sanctuary and David from Ashes to Blooms talking about Lucy Rabbit, we've now got the Dead Pet Girls, which sounds awful, but is brilliant. So listen up. I'm going to share with you a little bit about them before we launch into it. And we have got a lot to cover. And so I'm not going to talk too much. We're just going to go straight into it and say as much as we can about all these incredible projects that none of you will have heard of. Really, I know it. I know that there are so few of you out there listening to this who will have heard these stories about animals and the people that memorialize them, essentially. So do be aware that there is conversation in this one about death and pets. And so if that is likely to be triggering for you at the moment, might be better to come back to it another time. So Kat Dorman is a curator and an emerging writer, currently based in Washington, D.C. So we have all the international people on this podcast, everybody. She's developed the lead exhibits for a new museum across from the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, exploring the fraught concept of the American dream, opening in 2025. I mean, that sounds, first of all, incredible. And I'm so amazed that you're on this podcast, but also really a lot of work. I'm feeling like that's a hell of a commitment. I'd love to hear more about that, actually. What I suspect will happen is that you'll have to come back. So much of her work centers on the intersection of social history, arts, and literature and death culture. So you will see the link with Opening Ceremony podcast. And with the Dead Pet Girls, which is what you're going to hear about today, she particularly enjoys bringing to life the many wild and fascinating personalities buried in the history of pet loss and animal culture, and exploring what we can learn from them, which is obviously something I'm really interested in too, like current day stories and past stories. We really do learn a lot about our relationship to each other through ceremony, but we also learn a lot about our relationship to the world when we look at animals and our relationships to animals and how they've altered. And they've actually altered quite a lot, apparently, but also not so much. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So Kat received her BA from American University in Literature and Art History, and an MA from University College London in English. So I think we can basically establish that we're dealing with an academic who knows what they're talking about. So that's the one. And this is the most important thing about it. So you may have heard all about her qualifications, and that's all well and good. But what really matters is the following. She survives her deceased cats, Max, Minnie, Marie, hamster Duchess, and fish Annie and Pud ×4. So that's the most important thing here, is our relationship to our animals. Steph, who I think has disappeared for a second. Steph Bolton is a documentary producer and a writer based in London who works in both development and production. She holds a dynamic track record, having nurtured acclaimed documentaries from initial concept to broadcast on prestigious platforms such as the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, and Disney+. And so I think we can establish that she also knows what she's doing. I haven't yet found out what those are because I'm really more interested in the animals. Pet Girls provides a platform for her to explore and share her fascination with the interplay of pop culture, history, and pets, whilst also providing solace and community for those of us journeying through pet loss. So, and she has a BA in history from the University College of London. So that's what we have. We have bright young things, academics, and you know what they love the most? Animals. That's what matters. And I think we have failed to read out the people who have been survived, the animals who've been survived. So she survives her dog Henry, rabbits Tippy and Lola, fish Flipper and Dipper, very, very original names, and cat Cassius Earl Grey the First. That's okay. So I rambled on and on about these people because the reason I said all the details, Kat, is because I know there was a lot of information there and I was thinking about we should really have edited it down a little bit. But then the more I read, the more I felt, no, I really want my listeners to understand how lucky they are to hear your voice because I think you're quite an impressive person and I wanted them to know. So that's us. So we've had a few technical difficulties just now. So we are just getting back into it, everybody. So bear with us. So we're going to just go straight in and I'm going to explain a little bit about Dead Pet Girls. We met, didn't we, on a Lifting the Lid festival, which is an international festival, which is just, well, you must go to it. It's just all kinds of weird and wonderful and fascinating and brilliant people who are all involved in the field of death one way or another. They're the kinds of things that you wouldn't imagine, like the Dead Pet Girls who turned up and started talking about all the different ways in which pets are memorialized and the culture around it and the connection with digital media and digital memorialization and all the things. And if you go on their website, you will discover a brilliant video about the Kardashians and how pets are used in the Kardashians as a device, and all kinds of brilliant blogs about people that have organized funerals for their dogs and found that only 4 people turned up. So what you've got at your disposal for the next hour are these people who have gone into all the intricacies, really geeked out, aren't you, on all stuff around animals and death and memorialization. And so it's argued that things have changed a lot since the world has gone the way it's gone, and lots of people are not having children because they can't or they can't afford it or they're worried about the planet. And so there's this change in our relationship with animals. But I've picked up from your Instagram, and if you want to follow these people on Instagram, you must follow them on Dead Pet Girls. It's just literally at Dead Pet Girls, isn't it? And you'll see loads of posts on there which will make you think about pet memorialization slightly differently. And I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about that because it's different in different cultures and different times, isn't it? And I know that Victorians had a really close relationship to their animals and memorializing. So there's quite a lot of nuance, I think, as is always the case with any kind of academic study. And so the level at which you've studied it, I think, will prove that our usual assumptions day to day about the way things are now. You might hear an older person saying, "Oh, I don't understand it. In my day, the dogs were just left outside and we didn't bother with them. And now they're pushed around in prams and I don't understand it." So you could be forgiven for thinking that this is a really big shift. But I found a photograph of my father's cat. It was actually my grandmother's cat, it must have been in the 1920s, sat at the table with a bib. So it's not true, is it? I think it's just like the shame is leaving. It's something around the shame and so many of you, well, you're all animal lovers out there in my constellation, but many of you will have had pet bereavements. And I know for sure that many of you are um, people who would like to memorialize your animals, but you don't quite know how to go about it, or you're a bit embarrassed and you don't know what to do. So these are the people to go to if you want to hear more, if you want a sympathetic ear, if you want someone to say, no, what you're feeling is valid and important. Absolutely. But what we're going to talk about is just, I've asked them to come up with something that they really, really want to share, because that's what we're all about on opening ceremony. And I know it's something that you're really, really going to want to hear. And we're going to talk a little bit about Japan, and you'll find out why, and a little bit about Facebook and all kinds of different things to do with digital spaces. So we're going to start off with you, Jeff, talking a little bit more about Japan, and then move on to Kat to talk about all the other aspects that we've had a little prior chat that none of you were in on, but you will hear all about it. Forgive me if you hear motorbikes going past and cats purring and all kinds of things beeping. Is the best I can do. So I'm going to ask you, Steph, just to introduce a little bit about the things that you told me about just now about Japan.
Yeah, of course. So, we've been running Dead Pet Girls for a number of years now, and it's been very interesting to kind of look into how, it's given us a real lens into different cultures and how different cultures react and respond to pet loss. And I think almost immediately, myself and Kat in our research sort of seemed to discover that Japan is a culture that has just, I think we were saying, Jess, just before, it's a culture that seems to have kind of ceremony quite deeply kind of within the fabric of Japanese culture. And I think that then kind of becomes part of their understanding of pets and pet loss. And I think, immediately it was once we started doing research, it was one of the first places that we realized was actually quite ahead in, just quite simple things like, workers being able to have a day off when their pet has died, which is, something that I think we recently shared, and some stats from Blue Cross saying that people still really struggle with that in the workplace. And, a huge percentage of people wish that their employers would, be much more sympathetic and understanding of pet loss in the workplace. Um, but one of the things that we first immediately came to, which we just thought was amazing, was this concept of kind of pet loss cafes, of which there's one that's quite well known in Japan. And I believe it's run by a pet cremation and pet funeral company. But they've set up this space within their shop, I think it is, this kind of adjacent space that is a cafe that pet owners can come to, whether it's the week your pet has passed away, whether it's a few months after, it could even be a few years after. And you can come to this cafe, and all of the workers there are part of the team that work as part of the kind of pet cremation and pet funeral company. So they understand what it is. They are the kind of sympathetic ear that you need in that moment. But they encourage people to create altars. And we can send you some photos of this, Jess, and these amazing altars in quite a traditional style. You've got kind of an
Send them through and we'll put them up. Me and Jack have started doing fancy things. When I say me and Jack has started putting things on the YouTube. So we've got little pictures popping up. We're very proud.
amazing.
So send it. Yeah, that would be really cool. And we'll put them in the notes all about it.
Yeah, so these are beautiful altars with a kind of an image of the pet, and sometimes maybe it's a collar or a candle or a little bit of, pet food. And they encourage you to kind of just really think about the pet loss and think of the pet and the memories of the pet. And there's not I mean, I can't imagine something like that really opening in England, in the UK. I mean, I think, we've come on quite a lot. And I think especially we started this around the time of the kind of pandemic. It was a pandemic project that has kind of just blossomed and blossomed. And I think now, pet ownership has completely spiked. And I think even in the last few years, I think the way we consider pets has really changed in this country, and I think across a lot of the world. But it was quite hard to imagine something like that popping up in like London or Manchester or something, and that people would go and there wouldn't be kind of like loads of silly articles being like, guess what's popped up in London this week? A pet loss cafe. Can you imagine? But it's taken really seriously. And there's amazing TV interviews you can watch, and interviews with the staff there. And people, there's this, as one, I remember specifically reading about one person who had come in and said that they'd done an altar for a pet that had passed away quite a long time ago, but just the act of doing it had evoked so many emotions again. And there's like all these photos of this person obviously like crying at the altar and everything. But I think it's really important that people are given, I mean, this is one thing that I thought was just so special about this, is that people are given the space for kind of ceremony and real sense of memorial that is doesn't just exist around the time of loss. And I think that's something that also transcends to human loss, where there's processes in place that take you kind of as far as the funeral, and then as far as society is concerned, the funeral's finished and that chapter is closed. And obviously, we all continue on our own grief journey, but there isn't much opportunity, I guess, except for kind of like anniversaries, to kind of access that feeling of memorial and ceremony surrounding loss, and give yourself the space and time to go somewhere. It's a real practice going somewhere that's not just at home thinking about it, especially if you're, someone who has had your pet cremated. You can't go to a graveyard and have that ceremony, but to be able to go to this cafe and create this altar, I think we would just, and also, I mean, one of the best photos we've got of it, I think everything is like candy pink and classic kind of pet loss kitschy style. It's just beautiful to see. And, I think it's really just such a kind of testament to, as we were saying, this kind of like ceremony in the fabric of Japanese culture that we can learn from so much in the Western world. That it's things like even since the pandemic, seeing more and more people, the messages we get with people saying, "I've had a painting done of my cat. They're not dead yet, but I know I'm going to want it when they're gone," or all kind of pet loss memorial jewelry and everything. People kind of really tapping into those practices of memorialization and kind of ceremony that kind of make, I mean, I think also, it's all about breaking that taboo of pet loss, and about elevating pets to the place in which that accurately reflects not just what society thinks, but actually how you felt about your pet and what that loss meant to you. To someone else, it might just be that pet budgie that they saw sometimes at your house, but to you, your relationship with that pet is so different, and it's completely down to you on your terms how much you choose to kind of elevate that pet in that kind of moment of loss. And we just thought that the pet loss cafes were just such a really like sweet and sentimental, but also quite a powerful example of that.
Well, there's in Japan, but are there some in? Are you saying there are some in the UK
No, I
now?
was saying that it's something
Oh,
if something like that popped up.
if
Yeah, I
only.
mean, if only, but also I think kind of
Yeah.
I think British people and also the Western world thinks a lot of itself. I think sometimes often too much of itself, and I think
You
actually,
think?
I think we would react quite badly to something like that opening. I mean, there's definitely people in this community I think would really appreciate it, but I can only imagine what the Daily Mail would write off the back of something like that
Oh
opening.
no. Oh my God. But isn't it funny though? It's so typically hypocritical because, I mean, first of all, if you're going to open one of these cafes anywhere in the world, it's Brighton.
Yeah,
Renault just came in. He's not even a dog person. The other day he went to the gym and he saw this poodle with a big fluffy grey afro, sleeky little slinky legs,
incredible.
and all the decorative pom poms, and it super camp dog. I think it was about waist height and it was grey, but the hair was too floppy for everything else and nothing sort of fitted together. And he came home and he said, I've just seen this incredible dog. I can't tell you how funny he is. It's just, and he's moving around as if he owns the place. And he was just so besotted with this dog, and he doesn't even like animals. But in Brighton, you have to like animals or you can't stay. And everyone that walks past you has a dog. Everyone has a dog. And this dog, he said, oh, I wish I'd seen it. I wish you'd seen it. You'd love it. And he came back from the gym again today. And he walked in and he said, I've just met Sebastian. And I said, well, who's Sebastian? Who the fuck is Sebastian? He was like, Sebastian, the party poodle, of course. And he's a party poodle. They're called party poodles, apparently. And he's called Sebastian. And so he apparently had said to this dog owner, the dog's mum, oh, I saw your pet the other day. I saw this dog and I just told my partner about it. I just think he's so amazing. Um, it is just so lovely. She said, "Oh, he's called Sebastian." And apparently my partner said, "Of course he's called Sebastian. Of course he is. What else are you gonna call him?" So here, you cannot go a day without a conversation about an animal of some description. Our house is run by Burmese cats. We don't have a lot to do with anything anymore. Everything is a consideration around the animals here. Every cafe you go in will have treats for dogs. Every shop, health food shops, health food treats, bowls of water everywhere. It's just a complete animal planet. So if you're going to open one anywhere, you could open it here. But having said that, you are right about the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail, who will propound the virtues of the royal family, who are obsessed with corgis and horses, the very same people will be saying, "Oh, why would you be sad about an animal?" And it is bizarre because the UK is notoriously more interested in animals than humans. That's what we're known for, apart from beer drinking, isn't it? Loving our animals more than humans, which I mean is true. So why we
It's
can't
so
do
true.
the more? It
Yeah,
is
no,
true, Pat.
it's so true, and, even again, I think so much of the conversations around pet death and the royal family are fascinating, like, back to you mentioned the Victorian era, like, Queen Victoria was a total dead pet girl. She and Albert would sit together, and draw their dogs, and then when their dogs died, they opened the pet cemetery that the Queen later, Queen Elizabeth II later, buried her beloved corgi Susan, who was her first corgi, that her whole lineage of corgis up to the 2000s, and then they started getting them
Oh
from
my
different
God, I
ones, but
did
they
not know
all came from
this.
Susan.
This is so
Um
juicy. Is this true?
Oh, yeah.
I love this.
They are huge, but Queen Victoria was deeply obsessed with her dogs. She had many portraits painted of her dogs. This is when you first start getting, like, memorial paintings of dogs.
She was a real trendsetter in that
Her
sense.
she had, a dog that was brought over from China, unfortunately, when, like, the British looted China, and the dog was named Ludi. very on the nose. And she is stuffed and I believe stuffed and on
Stop
display in a
it.
cage,
Luty. Stop it.
preserved.
Oh
Yep,
my
Luti,
God.
the dog who was looted from the Imperial Palace in China.
It's
Just
not
never
even any
I
smoke and
ends.
mirrors there,
Mm,
is it? It's just straight up.
no.
No,
It's
never
so
ends.
entwined with, I think, both. You have the queen side of it with Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth, and then you also have the kind of aristocratic, like, hunting dogs. The earlier kind of pet burials you'll see in the UK are often on country estates where, various, like, pedigreed hunting dogs are buried outside or have a headstone, and they're very austere and just name and date, and you'll see those around both in the UK and the US, the more, like, posh aristocratic houses, but, there's been it's so interesting the kind of intersection between, I think, class and pet death and pet memorialization, I think, is
Oh,
one that's really it's fascinating, and I think a lot of the stories we get from the past are of the aristocratic set or the artistic set, partly because they had the leisure time and the resources to keep pets in their homes and to write about them or get paintings made of them. Um, and so I think that it creates a really interesting bias that I think about a lot in our history and how we think about the history of pets and pet
Yeah.
death and what we're able to look at and understand. So yeah, just the royal family, both in the UK and then also even kind of across
Yeah.
Europe. There's the royals. I mean, the French court. Catherine the Great in Russia had a pyramid built to her dead pets that's on the grounds of one of her palaces. There's a lot to say about royal families and
oh
dead
my God.
pets.
Please, will you come back and do that? I'm
Yes.
just thinking like we could talk forever because the more you think about it, the more that's so right, isn't it? And then all the questions around, is it the working classes thinking, well, it's all right for the wealthy because they've got the time and the leisure and they don't have to eat their animals because they're not hungry? Is it that they're thinking we don't mourn for our animals because we're not privileged, or is it? I mean, there's so many questions. Is it just this social history thing where there's all these gaps
Yeah,
like there is for
exactly.
working classes in everything? Maybe they have been honoring and burying their animals and memorializing them, but we just don't know the names.
Totally. I think my favorite game to play is, does this National Trust house have a pet cemetery? And 9 times out of 10, it does. Oh
Really?
gosh, the amount of people who don't realize when they get a map for, like, a big estate, there'll almost always be a pet cemetery marked on there. And me and Kat are, like, straight in that direction.
You like me and all my death friends. We love a cemetery, don't we? For the pet cemeteries, I have to fess up, I was really drawn to everything you put on there, the historical stuff and the cemeteries and on your Instagram, I mean. Honestly, everybody, please, will you go and check out the Dead Pet Girls because you'll see all these things that you just exactly that, things on the map that you didn't know were there. I'm going to move on a bit to this conversation that we had about the two things that you mentioned before, the person that rescues or goes to animals that are kind of not honored otherwise, and then the person on Instagram who set up a whole feed around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in working primarily online and on Instagram, we've become such a part of a great community, and really been able to think about the different ways, again, that we think about not only our own pets, but animals at kind of a social level and what kinds of lives are warrant death memorialization and consideration. And I think an account and a photographer that we adore is Amanda Stronza, and she has for the last few years done these amazing pieces that I could never do, where she'll find an injured animal or an animal that has been hit on the road and is roadkill or died, just happens upon them, and whenever she does, she pulls over and picks up the animal and takes it to a beautiful patch of grass or, area off the road out of harm's way, and then we'll gather flowers, leaves, petals, sticks, little rocks, and create beautiful kind of mandala-esque, memorials around their body, and we'll put, if something over their eyes, or if they're particularly wounded in a certain area, place something over that, and then photograph that and share it on Instagram. And it's such a beautiful tribute, I think, to just caring for lives and a degree of empathy that I think is often, forgotten, or not even forgotten, but just never considered towards, a snake on the side of the road. I think her snakes are some of her most beautiful works, and I'm terrified of snakes, but the way that she just treats them with such care, I think really lends itself to thinking about how we can care more about those kind of animals that you think are lesser than, right? Or we've had really interesting conversations with people who someone we know had a collection of pet beetles, and the way that she loved her beetles, and you can't tell them apart, but they collectively and as little individuals, you could tell. She was like, "Oh, I could tell, the coloring on on their wings." It's something that I would never have thought about, considering a collection of bugs as a beloved pet. And I think similarly with Amanda Stronza's work, the care that she takes is so moving, and she, up until recently, would often be with her beloved dog, Matilda, doing these photo shoots, but then recently Matilda, who was a senior dog, passed away, and so a lot of her posts more recently have been very much reflective on her relationship to Matilda and sharing photos that she had done with Matilda and thinking about, "Oh, when you were here with me for this, and I miss you so much today, and I feel you with me." And it's, I think, really taken on another level, sadly, but also beautifully since Matilda's death. I think her work really set her up to be so open and so considerate following Matilda's death, and I think we're really grateful that she shares that so openly.
And the more people that share openly, the more okay it is to do. And I love it. So I've got to plug myself in. I've run out of battery now on top of everything. Um, but just briefly, funnily enough, a friend of mine, she was a lockdown companion. We went running together. And by that, I mean she ran and I trotted behind her. She's a notorious hard ass. She's unsentimental in every regard and prides herself on being a proper tough northerner, and thinks I'm pathetic southerner, which is true. Um, but I once went out running with her and there was I think it was a pigeon by the side of the road who died. And she did that exact thing and she wrapped it in leaves and gave it a proper kind of, and it was this strange thing of seeing this really tough person suddenly become really attentive and tender. So I was on to her from that moment on. Said, I've seen you do that now. You can't undo it. But there's something very humanizing in the way if we start to acknowledge our love for our animals, it's something softens. And I think that's really important.
There's really interesting history, and then I wanna return. Steph had remembered something fascinating about Amanda that I wanna return to, but
Oh, yeah.
there's a fascinating book, called Beast in the Boudoir, which is something that we read early on, which is about the animal rights movement in Paris and
Beast in the
the
boudoir.
yes, you can get it
Brilliant.
secondhand pretty easily, and
Right.
it's an academic book, it's so good, but it talks a lot about the intersections of the animal rights movement being weaponized against the working class in Paris, and as saying like, "Oh, the working class, like, they beat their donkeys because they don't care about animals and we're better than that." Like, a lot there was a really fascinating period where it was setting out differences in humanity effectively and how they treated their animals. And again, of course, this is a false equivalent. It was just a really kind of vicious way to weaponize people caring about animals and then saying, "Well, that's why we're the upper classes because we treat our animals well, we don't work them to death," as opposed to people who have working animals. And so there's the classism of it is really, pervasive.
There's also always all these awful tyrants and dictators and monsters who are really in love with their animals. I think Hitler loved his animals. It's really
Yes.
disturbing because you often
Yes.
hear people say, "Oh, I knew I was in love with my partner when I saw them with my animal."
Yeah.
Because you can't be that kind to animals if you're a cruel person. But history tells us otherwise.
It really does.
That's a
There's
really
really
bleak.
interesting discourse. There's a cat rescuer I follow called Poet Square Cats, and she's based in Arizona. And she always shares a lot of pieces that have been really thought provoking for me around like people who say like, "Oh, I don't like people. I only like animals," and how that kind of minimizes empathy towards people. Like she really looks a lot at the intersection of kind of human social justice and human empathy. and where sometimes that slips in prioritizing animals, which she's dedicated her life to rescuing cats. Like, she's clearly very invested in this and in community care for feral cats. But I think it's something I hadn't really considered that much because I was like, yeah, I'm a total animal person, but I think there are ways that love for animals can kind of be weaponized against
Yeah.
people.
When you think about
That
it, you always hear it's the trope, isn't it, of the middle-aged lady, the cat lady, or the old lady that left all her money to the cats because she's so selfish.
Yeah.
There's this kind of whole loads of judgment around those archetypes. It is really, this is what I love about my podcast, that you get an opportunity to just go a bit deeper underneath these apparently innocuous things that we do all the time. All of us talk about this stuff all of the time. And it's funny because people always say to me, oh, people don't talk about death. We don't talk about death. And it's the last taboo, but I kind of think we talk about death in really circumventory ways. I think we do, but I don't think it's obvious that we're doing it. And you will have a lot of conversations with people where their animals have died, because obviously, if you've ever had an animal, it's always going to die,
Yeah.
and it's quite often going to die before you. So most people you meet will be able to have a conversation with you about their animal, but not so much about their human.
Mhm.
And what I find happens, first of all, in my line of work, animals are central. First of all, I have to meet them all. If I do a funeral, I have to go to the house and meet the animals. And there was one I went to, they had 9 Dachshunds all in one place. And that was a lot. I know it was a lot there. One of them was called Doris, and she was a bit nippy, and I wasn't allowed near her. But everywhere you go, you have to meet the animals. You have to list the name of all the family cats in order. And a lot of the story of their life, the arc of their life, takes place around when they had the animals. And that was when we got Tommy and Bobby, and we were living in Spain at the time. And then you get the whole. So this is part of my job. Weddings now, the ring bearers are quite often dogs, and they have to. And there's recently been. My friend Roxy had a viral video. It was the ring bearer came in a little remote control toy car, about this big, down the aisle and along the Persian carpets, pampas grass and all the things, big boho style wedding. And the dog had the rings around his neck, and it drove in this car. It's on Instagram, I'll tag you. It's on
Yeah,
Roxy
that's
Celebrates
a
Love.
must-see evidence.
Okay, I'll send it you. It's like, I don't know, the last time I looked, it was like 30,000 likes or something.
amazing.
So there you go. So that's happening in ceremony all over the place, with weddings, with funerals. But the one thing universally that everyone will say is, I know it sounds stupid, but I was more upset about the cat, the dog, the rabbit.
Exactly.
Did you come across that?
Oh my gosh. Like, I mean, most of the time it's kind of, DMs saying, you've made me not feel stupid by like Dead Pet Girls existing. Um, and it's true. But I mean, there's an, I said one thing I remember quite often is, quite recently, I think Fern Cotton lost her cat. And I was surprised at the way she'd kind of written about the cat, that I think it kind of really sums up the kind of relations we have with our pets, that even though they are there often for a shorter amount of time than our, human loved ones, um, she'd written about this cat who I think she'd got the cat when she first moved to London, long before she'd become kind of a radio DJ and TV presenter. And the cat had gone through, I think, 3 or 4 relationships with her. It had gone through all these house moves. It had gone through, just like you're saying, oh, we moved there and that's when we got this dog. And, the fact that this cat had kind of been witness to so much in her life, had also been there through the breakups, through the jobs that she didn't get, through the friendship arguments and all that kind of thing. And then, I think she speaks about maybe her like driving tests and failing that, and the cat being there. And, it's, now she has a partner and she has children, and, there's a kind of fuller family outside of it. But at one point it was just her and her cat against the world. And when that cat dies, the support for all of those years, it's like, the kind of rug from under your feet. And I think she was almost surprised at how upset she was about it. And I think, we've spoken a lot for, there's a number of reasons. I mean, you don't have to have a kind of really crazy reason why that pet loss does feel more than a human loss, but there's been lots of kind of interesting things that we've looked at in studies, where, like, for example, the way pets can be for kind of LGBTQ plus young people who maybe they live in families where they don't feel like they can come out. And so they are themselves unapologetically with their pet. And then their pet dies. And that relationship, you've not even come out to your parents, but maybe you've kind of had that silly conversation with your cat about it, and your cat knows who you are. And there can be, it's really kind of complicated, I think, trying to quantify and compare the loss of a pet to a human being. I think it's a living thing that has loved you and you have loved them. And that's the kind of unifying moment in all of it. It doesn't matter that it has four legs and a tail. Like, it still means that much to you. And I think kind of that Fern Cotton story always sticks in my mind, just reading it and thinking, you've really, I felt in reading it, she'd been quite blindsided by how heartbroken she was. But then actually when she'd gone back and looked, that cat had been there for all of that, friends that had come and gone and boyfriends that had come and gone. But for her, the cat was always at the end of the bed. And I just kind of, we can't forget how close we are. And they live in our, you might not move in with a partner for years, but your cat's moves in from day one.
And they're in your bed.
Yeah.
Like, I know all of you out there, none of you can lie to us. We know they're in your bed. And we know that you said, never or not on my watch, I'm not having a cat in my bed. Forget it.
Exactly.
Oh, we're in the new house now. We're not having the cat in the bed. We know you're all lying, and you're lying to yourselves if you think you're going to keep them out. It's not going to happen. I heard a similar thing with Jonathan Van Ness when because he's a big animal fan, and one of his cats died. And being Jonathan, one of my heroes really, being Jonathan Van Ness, he just came on crying his eyes out, saying, I'm devastated and it's horrendous, and was just all out. This is my reality. And I loved him for that, because I think that's how we all feel, that we feel that we can't burst into tears when we buy a coffee.
Yeah.
And say, I'm just really sad because this happened. I've done funerals where the animal has survived the person I've done the funeral for. And so they've ended up, there's two I remember particularly. One of them was they're really kind of specific animals as well. They're not the kind of animals that you would necessarily choose to adopt, especially if you were not a cat lover in the first place, or a parrot lover for that matter. So there's one, I think Sparky's turned up on my podcast before, but there was this parrot called Sparky, and the woman that died, Zena, she was quite young, but Sparky was her pal. She was very reclusive towards the end, but Sparky was always there, and she'd inherited Sparky from someone else. And I'm sorry to tell you, listeners, but I don't know what became of Sparky. I don't know where he went to live, but I hope he's happy, because they live quite a long time, don't they? And then the other couple that I'm thinking about is this really, really stubborn woman called Elizabeth. She was very elderly and very stubborn, and she'd lived 3 kind of lives in the course of her lifetime. She'd lived here and had a section of her life where she was this, and then translator in Malaysia, and then so she was one of these grand old dames. She was fascinating, and she was all about her cat. She didn't have children, but her niece had to deal with the funeral for her, and I got brought in, and there are these 2 Siamese cats that she'd adopted just as she was going into the early ages of dementia. And they said they'd like to blame it on the dementia, but they think it was just bloody mindedness, that her baby cats died and she wanted some more. I was like, too right she did. Maybe she was 85 and she wanted, so she just went out, took no notice of anybody, bought these 2 Siamese cats. And we all know what a Siamese cat might, well, I don't know if we all know, but they have personalities, don't they? They're really present in the room. And this woman she'd ended up, her aunt died, and there was no one to look after these 2 Siamese who they were young kittens. And she said, well, I'm not a cat person. I'm going to have to just take them in for a couple of days because they were Auntie Elizabeth's kittens, and I'll have to, while I wait for, and of course we know what happens next, don't we? They fell in love, and that was that. And she was immediately a Siamese cat owner. They do choose you. That's what happens. And I remember another particularly sad one where it was a very young woman died, and her partner was left with 2, they were Siamese as well. And when you do my work, you become really quite intimate with people and with their stories and with their relationships with their pets. And one time I was writing a script for this guy, and he sent me a WhatsApp, and it was just a picture of his kitchen completely covered in coconut flour. There were like little monsters. They'd rampage through the larder, taken everything out like cartoons, ripped open the coconut flour, put all their paws in it, and just basically decorated the kitchen. And I sort of feel like I really believe that animals mourn for their people. And part of me feels as though those animals were acting out. I'm fascinated by all that as well. That's a whole other thing, isn't it? The way elephants and dolphins and all kinds of animals and cats. I mean, one of mine, she cried after her brother died and she hated him. Absolutely didn't give him the time of day. And then when he died, she howled for weeks.
That happened with my childhood cats. Yeah, they weren't close, but one of the older one died, and the younger one was antisocial for a while, like, wouldn't hang out with anyone but me, and just would walk around yowling like she was looking for him, and
Oh,
it was
that's awful.
so
Oh, it's
heartbreaking. And it's
heartbreaking.
interesting, there was actually research just recently published, about cats grieving, of I think, and a bunch of newspapers have picked it up, from The Guardian to, I think, Nat Geo. It's just been everywhere, over the last couple of weeks, around research suggesting that cats grieve and animals grieve, and to us, we're like, "No, duh." Like, we've seen it,
No
there's so
shit,
again, from
Sherlock.
exactly.
Exactly.
I didn't know the swearing policy here. That's right.
Really? Well, anything
Um
goes.
So, but it's been fascinating to see the amount of uptick that this article has, and I'm glad that people are
Mm.
learning this, but I think to those of us who love animals or have watched them grieve, or, yeah, watch them adjust when their human owner dies, I think, again, with elderly owners or changing hands, it absolutely, they all go through adjustment periods, and they definitely care, like, my cat growing up who pretended she didn't like my mom that much would wait for her in the window every night to come home from work, like, they definitely they care in their own ways, and it's beautiful, and there's I think, again, it's this bias that we had of, like, trying to create differentiation between humans and animals that goes way back to, like, the Enlightenment, and that we're these higher beings and we have feelings and they're actually just machines, and so they don't deserve burials in the way that we do. Like, there's a lot of thought from the Enlightenment and from the church around that opposes, really, I think, less fervently now, but historically, animals being buried in any way that resembles a human grave or could be seen as kind of blasphemous against the dignity of human life. And I think those morals, whether you consider yourself actively Christian or had, like, they just, the way that everything kind of seeps into our society, I think it's a bias that we've been taught that really came from trying to say, like, humans are so much superior to these other creatures. But then again, yeah, you see orcas, like, bringing their dead friend along with them, or elephants mourning a baby elephant, or, like, you see it in
Yeah, we're all
nature.
the same, really.
Visiting the site of the dry bones.
Oh,
I've been reading a
Yeah.
book called Ritual. They visit the elephants, will go back to the site of the dry bones of someone, one of their elephants that they love. It's
heartbreaking.
absolutely unbelievable, and it's so sad, isn't it, that we've done that. Tell us a bit more about the Instagram situation that you just introduced me to. This person who I forget the name of.
Oh, yes,
Yes,
Westy Taps.
Westy Tap.
So
Tell me about that.
their account is Westy_Taps, and this account was started as a memorial project to their, beloved Westy who died, and so it was really just a place to kind of process their grief and share photos, share memories, work actively through this very current and lingering grief, and in time, as they've continued posting, they became so interested in pet loss and pet death that they're now doing a PhD focused on pet loss and, culture and research around, or research into the culture around pet death and data about pet memorials and things I can't remember the details of, but they're well into the process of it, and I think that just, again, goes to show, much like how we've found it to be this kind of bottomless pool of fascinating both history and research, but also how we think about our place in the universe. I think it's amazing to see other people having that same reaction and taking it into academic space, which I think there's so much fascinating academic work around death and how we think about death going around. And I love seeing that pet loss and pet death and how we think about ourselves and death in relation to animals. Also getting that attention, I think, is incredible. And so I highly recommend she posts about the process of developing her research and her work and gives updates on that on her account. And she's just doing great work and is so amazing and still continues to post photos of her Westies that are very, very cute.
I don't think many people in our constellation will realise that this is a whole area of academic research. I didn't until I met you. I don't think people know. And I think that's really nice as well. So a number of things I hope to do with my podcast. And one of the things is to give people hope. And there is something profoundly hopeful about hearing about someone picking up roadkill from the side of the road and wrapping them in leaves and giving them there's something really profoundly hopeful about the tenderness of that. And I just think there's something really hopeful about the fact that we're starting to understand that maybe humans don't rule the world. Maybe that animals maybe know a little bit more than we do, and at least that we're on an even keel, that we're not better than. I think there's something really hopeful about that. I'm going to ask you some questions about your own life ceremonies because I do this for people because I'm nosy. So, Steph, have you got any examples handy of a ceremony that you've been to that you really loved? That was a really positive experience.
Positive experience. Oh my goodness. I think probably my granddad's funeral over in Ireland. I find just like Irish. I mean, I'm half Irish, but I find the culture of Ireland's just really something very special. And I'd been to kind of a couple of funerals over the years. And I don't know how much, and maybe you could speak to this a bit more, Jess. I don't know how much it is like an Irish Catholic thing or whether it is just kind of like the local town that he's from, the village, the community, but they really like to bury people with, it tends to be sort of like 2 or 3 favorite things. And it's kind of like the priest will ask for this.
I don't know, actually. I was imagining my response would be it's an Irish Catholic thing, but I don't
Yeah,
know
I
about
mean,
that. It might be
it's just
local.
something I've always experienced when I've gone to this church. And I quite like that there's no real kind of doesn't need it's meant to represent the person, but it doesn't need to be like, a rosary and a cross and a Bible. For example, my granddad's was a colouring book, an Arsenal shirt, and a loaf of soda bread because he loved soda bread so much.
Were there your 3 things, or did you have to have
No, as
consensus from
for
everyone?
the person that has passed away, it's kind of these 3 things.
Right.
And, I've seen bingo dabbers go in. I've seen it's like I love that, especially like, these Catholic services can be a bit kind of heavy and a real reminder of the afterlife and sometimes a bit of darkness. And I don't know, what Catholicism is like. I'm Catholic myself, but it's it's interesting as well in its own way. I think finding quite funny that you're here and you're reading these quite intricate Bible readings, and all of a sudden there's sort of like an Arsenal shirt and a loaf of soda bread coming in. Yeah. So that's just, I mean, I remember obviously just being like absolutely beside myself, heartbroken, could barely like breathe that day. But then this kind of flash of an Arsenal shirt and a colouring book and a soda bread, and I kind of thought, that's what it's all about. Like that's kind
Oh,
of, and I
yes.
thought, he wouldn't have minded that it came down to those 3 things. And I think it's nice because people really do bring forward to the altar these things that they don't need to kind of, you don't have to think too much about, I think, it maybe feels a bit silly that someone's life comes down to those 3 things. But I think actually they very much summed him up. And I like that people tend to, in Ireland, or at least in the village that my grandma's church is in, that people would seem to just sort of go with things that are a bit silly is maybe not the right word, but definitely characterful representations of these people.
I love this thing. I've never heard of it. And do they come up and put it on the altar and then the priest puts it in the
Yeah, I
casket?
think that's what happened. Yeah, I think we brought them up to the altar. I think they were blessed, which is also funny in itself, having a
Of
Arsenal shirt
course.
blessed. And then I think it's taken out and put into the coffin and buried with them.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I mean, one of the things I love about my podcast is every time I ask someone that question, and it's always different. Someone always has something different. That's never been said before. Kat, what about you? Do you have a favorite? It can be anything. It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be a funeral.
yeah, I'm gonna take it slightly. It is in a way. So when I was in graduate school at University College London, they have the auto icon of Jeremy Bentham, who is the 18th century philosopher on whose ideals UCL was founded. And so his auto icon are his wax covered bones in a clear case that sits just inside the main quad. And so I would walk past it most days. And it's a fake head because his head didn't come out quite right. And I think was heavy. So it's in a separate box, but so it's a fake wax face. And he was being shipped off to the Met for some art thing happening at the Met. I don't totally recall why the Met wanted him, but when they were sending him away, they decided to do a wake for Jeremy Bentham in the main quad building at UCL in the evening with drinks, and they invited a bunch of people to come and speak on different perspectives of death and death culture and mourning and loss. And this was before I was really into death culture. I think this was kind of actually what really piqued my interest and made it feel approachable to me. I didn't grow up with a death positive family. It's, very taboo and sad and scary. And I had always had kind of a morbid curiosity, but it didn't really extend into how we think about death. It was more like true crime, which now I actually don't have a taste for, which is funny. But
Well, I think the world
I
just went so bleak.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
almost impossible to watch murders for fun, isn't it?
exactly. It really I found a different path that feels
Yeah,
better.
me too. I kind of gave up on the Scandi noir in the end.
And so, that I think was just really powerful, and it was interesting. Like, one of the people talking ran programs for school children to go to morgues to see dead bodies, with under the concept that the first dead body you should see is not your loved one because the
That's
shock of
amazing.
seeing a person transformed. And in the moment, I was like, "Oh my god." But then I
Yeah.
was with my friend and we were like, "Actually, it makes a ton of sense." And then we both were
Yeah.
talking about, and it started, and we sat at these little round tables and you would discuss, and there were really cool, very eccentric people at the tables, but then also academics. And so it really fostered this conversation, kind of like lifting the lid, where we all were like, okay, yeah, the first real dead body I saw, or watching my dad, not me, but like someone else saying, watching my dad die and then seeing his body was really traumatic. And I kind of do wish I had had a more neutral death experience. And I think just that conversation in that event really highlighted a lot of different perspectives on death all around this figure that I loved and that I thought was so fun to walk past every day. And I love the kind of lore of the Jeremy Bentham auto icon who is now back at UCL. And so Jeremy Bentham's wake for me, I think, was really one of the first kind of death ceremonies that I've really had a positive
You
experience with.
two really delivered, let me tell you. Those two, I did not see coming, could not have seen coming. Have you got any negative ones?
I think it's not so much a regret around ceremony so much as not knowing, which is something we hear all the time, like not knowing what's possible. Or I think also so on the one hand, there's that, like with pet death, like when I've had my pets die, especially my cat Minnie, who I adored and who I now have a painting of over my bed, which a lovely friend that we've made through Dead Pet Girls who painted her dead guinea pig. Her, her name is Maddie Butling Art. We'll send her to you on Instagram. She's incredible. She painted her and she's now above my bed. But when she died and I was away at grad school, I didn't know what to do with that. My parents have her ashes, but I didn't like know how to grieve her. I actually was going to Steph's because we were going on a night out, and so I ordered 6 cupcakes for myself and showed up to Steph's with like a bottle of gin and a bunch of cupcakes. And I was like, "Let's go dance to George Michael, who's also dead." And because it was an 80s
George
night, and
Michael, oh my God, now you're
oh, I
talking.
cry about George Michael
Yeah.
regularly. I just think he's like
Every
the
Love
purest
to.
soul. It gets me, I guaranteed to cry thinking about that. It's such a small thing, but like that his estate has paid in perpetuity for the Christmas lights in Highgate, like where he lived.
Is that
And
true?
it's again such a small thing, but like just bringing Christmas cheer to the community,
Oh,
that's
it's
so
so
George Michael.
George. Well, look,
Yeah.
let me tell you, I was there when he was first a pop star because that was my era. I was in love with him. He was on my wall. And at the time, I think we didn't really know what gay was. So we were all the girls, absolutely astonished. We had no idea. Also heartbroken because he was so handsome
Yes,
and we loved
so
him.
handsome.
So I did not anticipate you being George Michael fans. That's great news.
Oh, big George. I have a. You know what? I'll be right back. Let me show you my George Michael
Yeah,
pillow.
show me, show me. Have you got any regrets, Steph?
I don't think I do. I think Kat's right in what she says about kind of, oh, here we go, the Jordan Mike. Amazing.
No.
The George Michael fan.
Not even Christmas. Uh-huh.
I love that. But wasn't he just the best singer? I just feel like he was a
Yes.
really great singer.
Just across the board. Sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to interrupt stuff. But yes, so
Oh no, it's
talented,
the
such a
best.
good heart, so generous,
Yeah.
All the things.
so handsome. Just he like
So
perfect
handsome.
human, it seems.
Oh my god, that's so funny. We're just asking
Anyway,
Steph
sorry,
if she's
Steph.
got any regrets for them, but
Yeah, I think I
anything.
haven't got any off top like right off the top of my head, but I think what Kat just said about kind of I think people often regret things when they find out how much more is available to them. And I think, I think also part of why we do Dead Pet Girls is, if you follow us, if we're on a good week, 3 times a week, you'll kind of on your feed will be a post that kind of quite lightly is a reminder of death in kind of a death positive way. That will sometimes feel fun, and that's okay because death can be kind of a bit silly and fun. Other times will feel very emotional, and everyone will end up putting sort of crying emojis in our comments. But it's a combination of lots of things, but it's kind of a reminder, but also a resource. Like, there's lots of people who say they follow us because, we're showing them all the different ways that they can memorialize their pet when that time comes. And, preparation is important. As kind of people that operate within the sort of death positive community, people really don't know what their options are, end up spending lots of money on something they don't feel very comfortable with, doesn't feel like it represented the pet or the person that has been lost. And, there's lots of different things you can do. And, whether it is a painting or whether it's kind of ashes in a ring or, different things that can be done with their fur, or there's so many amazing things that can be done. And I think people like to sort of follow us in many ways. And I hope we provide that resource where, that we create a world where people have less regrets over kind of the ceremonies that they choose to kind of have around their pets. I think people, the standard answer in a lot of places is no funeral, get the pet cremated and choose the urn and then have them on a shelf. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's also 101 other ways in which you can choose for that moment to go. And I think, giving people the autonomy to realize that it is a choice and there's lots of different ways, that there's not just one outcome for this. And choosing the way that feels right for your pet and the right way in which you wish to memorialize them. I think that hopefully Dead Pet Girls provides a resource that makes people have a lot less regrets around the choices they make when their pet dies.
That's a really cool answer. Um, there's two other questions that you can answer if you fancy. One is, if you were having any funerals, any ceremonies in the future, is there anything that you've learned or that you've seen or anything that you really like to do that you think, oh, I'll do that if I get the chance?
I really have enjoyed following, I want to make sure I get it right, but I believe it's Precious Creature on Instagram who pot roasted a cat, the famous internet cat. When she died, her owner sent her bones there. And she does this really cool process, I think, where bugs and like eat away the skin and everything, and you're left with this really beautiful skeleton that's gone through this natural process. And then she builds beautiful terrariums or displays of the bones, and I think it's very direct. Like I'm pre-grieving my cats when I'm like, do I want your bones or do I want your fur or like I think that's something though that feels, I think a beautiful kind of terrarium kind of display could be really beautiful. I love that kind of process of it. I think having more of a process is something that I'm really looking for. Again, not trying to dwell too hard on future pet death, but really again, as opposed to just feeling it was so abrupt and then now I have ashes, as Steph was describing. I like the idea, like Pot Roast's mom, when she was going through, kept sharing updates because it takes many months to get the bones completely clean. And I think there's kind of something, I think, emotionally that you can do as you process that and see the kind of transformation. I think it might allow for a kind of emotional transformation for me as well.
That's amazing. That's another one to follow and put on our show notes. What about you, Steph? Is there anything you'd like to do that you think you might do one day?
I think I've learned maybe coming more out of the sort of Catholic understanding of things which I grew up with, that there can just be a lot more joy in kind of any ceremony. And I think joy and music and, I think that is something that I think I hold on to in all these things that actually, I mean, I love to think about all of, anything when it comes to sort of funerals and ceremony around that, for it to be a celebration of life. I think that angle, um I just think is so helpful, and such a kind of, that's what it should be, ultimately.
It's quite a shift, isn't it, from those heavy Catholic churches
Yeah,
with the wounded Christ bleeding and the hands and the
exactly.
torture. It is quite a shift, and they're quite dark, generally speaking, aren't they,
Yeah, and I
churches?
think, the shift, even in, I feel like I've experienced probably in the last 10 years of, the funerals I went to when I was a child, where it was, you must wear black and grey and everything. And more often than not now, I think people say, oh, his favorite color was this, or, let's everyone wear fun shirts or fun florals because she loved this or whatever. And I think there does seem to be quite a turn towards that celebration of life energy, kind of, I think, coming through a lot more. I still love Victorian morning dress probably more than anything. And maybe if I was feeling particularly dramatic, I would lean into that. But I do just think kind of color and just all of everything that I kind of see a lot more of. And we follow people like yourself and others who just kind of create the most beautiful ceremonies that really represent the person. Because, people all in black doesn't represent everyone. It might represent a lot of people, but it doesn't represent everyone. And I think kind of having their representation in sort of all aspects of it, and make it, and it doesn't have to be something that is kind of, it's not a one size fits all. It's very much not that.
Yeah, there's recently been a questionnaire going around Funeral Choice, who have been collaborating with the national funeral comparison site. And they put a thing out about wearing black and loads of little reels about would you wear black and why do we wear black, and sort of giving permission, really. There's a lot of permission giving, isn't there? But like you, Steph, I, I don't so much want the black or the morning dress. What I do want is the horses. I want the horses with the plumes that everyone ridicules. I want them. Anyway, I can see the light is going now because we're heading into autumn at the point that we're recording. My last question is my favorite question. Um, I'm hoping, I'm hoping you have an answer. The question is, what gives you hope? What's giving you hope for the future right now? It's really not an easy question at this time in our history.
I think our community actually, I think, provides, I think I say both of us with quite a lot of hope. I think, it's, despite, I think often when we say we're dead pet girls, there is one of two reactions. Either people are like, what the hell is that? That sounds really cool. Or they're like, whoa, they hear the word dead and sort of spiral. And even when we were kind of thinking of what to name ourselves and we decided to go with Dead Pet Girls, I think we had even a lot of friends, personal close friends in our lives, who were like, please don't go with that name. Do you really have to use dead? And we were like, yeah, no, we actually really do. We want dead in the title. Um, and I think just kind of the community that we've built over the last sort of 4 coming up to 5 years, I think there's so much hope in that community. And, as we do obviously center around pet death, but largely I think the people that we follow exist within the sort of wider death community, death positive community. And I think seeing kind of the people like yourself, Jess, and others who are kind of actively working to make this a space that is, still as respected and understood as it's always has been, but also just with a fresher perspective and with the most empathy and kindness and warmth. And I just think, sometimes we can't respond to every DM, but when we see people within our community responding to each other in the comments, or, we've been doing quite a lot of guest posts recently, and people will put a blog post up and come to us saying, no, I've not really spoken to anyone about this and I want to publish it on Dead Pet Girls, and they do. And then suddenly, obviously, as is most things, find out they're not the only one going through that. And there's, 7 comments, people saying, gosh, I felt exactly the same when my X passed away. And it's just, I think there's a lot of hope from our community, and just sort of seeing the future really of um pet loss and memorialization sort of within our community, and the love and the kindness and the empathy that I think the members of our community share with each other and with us, because we've also been quite vulnerable about our own pet loss on the page, and sort of seeing people responding to that. I just think we've actually got, it's quite a common phrase, we've got like a very sweet corner of the internet, I think, and we're very grateful for it.
That's such a good thing. And that really is hopeful, isn't it? Do you think Steph has spoken for you, Kat?
Yeah, I would just second the kindness and the empathy, and I think the open-mindedness too. I think even beyond our community, I think I've noticed, maybe partly because of the pandemic and the way that I think it really, like, threw into shambles the way that we were used to grieving or saying goodbye, right? Like, for many people, if someone died during COVID, you maybe didn't even get to say goodbye in person, right? If it was during the 2020 in particular. And I think even more broadly among my, again, Irish Catholic family and people who really don't want to think about death, don't want to talk about it, I've noticed more openness. Or even when I'm at a beer garden and the hydrocremation comes up with my friend's fiance, like, I've just noticed more openness to kind of thinking about it and trying to understand things beyond the, like, you're embalmed, you're made up, you're put in this coffin, and you're in the ground, and that's, again, if that's what you want, wonderful. But I think people being open to thinking about, what do I actually want? What is fulfilling to me? What does legacy or memorialization mean to me? I think the just open-mindedness I've noticed over the last couple of years, where I think even a few years ago, there just really wasn't. It was kind of seen as fringy and on the outskirts. But I think, again, credit to the amazing work that people across the deaf community for hitting it from all angles are doing to make it approachable and make it something that we should return to thinking about, right? Like, it's always been a part of life. And I remember seeing Caitlin Doty from the Order of the Good Death talking about, like, we've never been farther from death. And, like, as in, like, we never, like, it's not in your living room, it's in the hospital, it's clinical, you don't see them
Yeah.
again, like, and trying to kind of bring it back and really help us heal and help us grieve. And I'm really hopeful by the optimism I've seen, or the open-mindedness I've seen from people across the board.
Yeah, they're helping to heal. And I think that a lot of that death came into our living rooms, didn't it, during COVID in a big way. Apparently, your generation are much better at talking about it than mine. Apparently. That's a whole other topic that I'm hoping to explore a bit. So that'll be the next thing. But I'm aware that I've taken up loads of your time. I could just chat for hours. So let's tell everyone again where people can find you.
So we are mainly over on Instagram, which is Dead Pet Girls. And then we have a website, which is deadpetgirls.com. We're over on Twitter, also on Dead Pet Girls, and TikTok for all sorts of content, which is just,
Oh, you're on TikTok.
yeah,
Of
yeah.
course you are.
No, I mean,
I've got a TikTok account. I've got about 5 people on it. I can't be
we've
bothered.
got to follow you,
But
Jess.
I bet that's really fun. Yeah, do it. So TikTok, Instagram, website, and you've also got a thing where people can write for you, I saw. Is that part of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so we did an open call for pitches, and that's still open. There's a form on our Instagram. People also submit through our website, or um, reach out in our DMs. And I think the website, for some reason, sometimes filters strangely, so we're sometimes a little slow in replying to those. But we do, like, it doesn't come straight into our email, which is very strange. But
We also have an email
yes,
now,
all
of
of those
course.
places. Yeah, email is also great, deadpetgirls@gmail.com. We love hearing from people, and I think everyone brings such an interesting perspective to pet death, whether it's because it's so relatable or it's super unique. There's so many stories to
And
tell.
have you got
And
anything coming up that you want to publicize, or anything that you're really passionate about right now that you want to direct people towards?
I don't think specifically. I think we're kind of in planning stages for what we can do in
Nice.
the next few months. So I would say watch this space and
Yeah.
there will be things, but nothing that has been finalized and announced yet.
Oh,
But
well,
we're always
okay.
looking at new ways to kind of grow and expand.
Well, I have loved every minute of this. So everyone, I give you Kat and Steph and the dead pet girls. Not everyone can call themselves that. I bet you're the only dead pet girls in the whole world, probably. And we'll put loads of links to all the things we've talked about in the show notes. I'm supposed to say like and subscribe, aren't I? Like and subscribe. There you go. I don't know if it makes people do it, but it would be good if they did.